Section 2 of the World's Best Orations, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The World's Best Orations, Volume 4. Dictators in American Politics, Part 2, by Henry Clay. The President professes to consider himself as charged by the resolution with, quote, the high crime of violating the laws and Constitution of my country, end quote. He declares that, quote, one of the most important branches of the government in its official capacity, in a public manner, and by its recorded sentence, but without precedent, competent authority, or just cause, declares him guilty of a breach of the laws and Constitution, end quote. The protest further alleges that such an act of the Constitution describes, quote, constitutes a high crime, one of the highest, indeed, which the President can commit, a crime which justly exposes him to an impeachment by the House of Representatives, and, upon due conviction, to removal from office, and to the complete and immutable disfranchisement prescribed by the Constitution, end quote. It also asserts, quote, the resolution, then, was an impeachment of the President, and in its passage amounts to a declaration by a majority of the Senate that he is guilty of an impeachable offense, end quote. The President is also of opinion that to say that the resolution does not expressly allege that the assumption of power and authority which it condemns was intentional and corrupt is no answer to the preceding view of its character and effect. The act thus condemned necessarily implies volition and design in the individual to whom it is imputed, and, being lawful in its character, the legal conclusion is that it was prompted by improper motives and committed with an unlawful intent, end quote. Quote, the President of the United States, therefore, has been, by a majority of his constitutional triers, accused and found guilty of an impeachable offense, end quote. Such are the deliberate views entertained by the President of the implications, effects, and consequences of the resolution. It is scarcely necessary to say that they are totally different from any which were entertained by the Senate or by the mover of the resolution. The Senate carefully abstained from looking into the quo animo, from all examination into the motives or intention with which the violation of the Constitution and laws were made. No one knows those motives and intentions better than the President himself. If he chooses to supply the omission of the resolution, if he thinks proper to pronounce his own self-condemnation, his guilt does not flow from what the Senate has done, but from his own avowal. Having cautiously avoided passing upon his guilt by prejudgment, so neither ought his acquittal to be pronounced by anticipation. But, I would ask, in what tone, temper, and spirit does the President come to the Senate? As a great state culprit who has been arraigned at the bar of justice, or sentenced as guilty? Does he manifest any of those compunctious visitings of conscience which a guilty violator of the Constitution and laws of the land ought to feel? Does he address himself to a high court with the respect, to say nothing of humility, which a person accused or convicted would naturally feel? No, no. He comes as if the Senate were guilty, as if he were in the judgment seat and the Senate stood accused before him. He arraigns the Senate, puts it upon trial, condemns it, and he comes as if he felt himself elevated far above the Senate, and beyond all reach of the law, surrounded by unapproachable impunity. He who professes to be an innocent and injured man gravely accuses the Senate, and modestly asks it to put upon its own record his sentence of condemnation. When before did the arraigned or convicted party demand of the court which was to try or had condemned him to enter upon their records a severe denunciation of their own conduct? The President presents himself before the Senate, not in the garb of suffering innocence, but in imperial and royal costume, as a dictator, to rebuke a refractory Senate, to command it to record his solemn protest, to chastise it for disobedience. Quote, the hearts of princes kiss obedience, so much they love it, but to stubborn spirits they swell and grow as terrible as storms, end quote. We shall better comprehend the nature of the request which the President has made of the Senate by referring to his own opinions expressed in the protest. He says that the resolution is a recorded sentence, quote, but without precedent, just cause, or competent authority, end quote. He, quote, is perfectly convinced that the discussion and passage of the above-mentioned resolutions were not only unauthorized by the Constitution, but in many respects repugnant to its provisions and subversive of the rights secured by it to other coordinate departments, end quote. We had no right, it seems, then, even to discuss, much less express any opinion on the President's proceedings encroaching upon our constitutional powers. And what right had the President to look at all into our discussions? What becomes of the constitutional provision which, speaking of Congress, declares, quote, for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place, end quote. The President thinks, quote, the resolution of the Senate is wholly unauthorized by the Constitution and in derogation of its entire spirit, end quote. He proclaims that the passage, recording, and promulgation of the resolution affixes guilt and disgrace to the President, quote, in a manner unauthorized by the Constitution, end quote. But says the President, if the Senate has just cause to entertain the belief that the House of Representatives would not impeach him, that cannot justify, quote, the assumption by the Senate of powers not conferred by the Constitution, end quote. The protest continues, quote, it is only necessary to look at the condition in which the Senate and the President have been placed by this proceeding to perceive its utter incompatibility with the provisions and the spirit of the Constitution, and with the plainest dictates of humanity and justice, end quote. A majority of the Senate assume the function which belongs to the House of Representatives and, quote, convert themselves into accusers, witnesses, counsel, and judges, and prejudge the whole case, end quote. If the House of Representatives shall consider that there is no cause of impeachment, and prefer none, quote, then will the violation of privilege as it respects that House, of justice as it regards the President, and of the Constitution as it relates to both, be more conspicuous and impressive, end quote. The Senate is charged with the, quote, unconstitutional power of arraigning and censuring the official conduct of the executive, end quote. The people, says the protest, will be compelled to adopt the conclusion, quote, either that the Chief Magistrate was unworthy of their respect, or that the Senate was chargeable with calumny and injustice, end quote. There can be no doubt which branch of this alternative was intended to be applied. The President, throughout the protest, labors to prove himself worthy of all respect from the people. Finally, the President says, quote, it is due to the high trust with which I have been charged, to those who may be called to succeed me in it, to the representatives of the people whose constitutional prerogative has been unlawfully assumed, to the people and to the states and to the Constitution they have established, that I should not permit its provisions to be broken down by such an attack on the executive department, without at least some effort, quote, to preserve, protect, and defend them, end quote. These are the opinions which the President expresses in the protest of the conduct of the Senate. In every form and every variety of expression he accuses it of violating the express language and spirit of the Constitution, of encroaching not only on his prerogatives, but those of the House of Representatives, of forgetting the sacred character and impartiality which belong to the highest court of justice in the Union, of injustice, of inhumanity, and of calumny. And we are politely requested to spread upon our own journal these opinions entertained of us by the President, that they may be perpetually preserved and handed down to posterity. The President respectfully requests it. He might as well have come to us and respectfully requested us to allow him to pull our noses, or kick us, or receive his stripes upon our backs. The degradation would not have been much more humiliating. The President tells us in the same protest that any breach or violation of the Constitution and laws draws after it and necessarily implies volition and design, and that the legal conclusion is that it was prompted by improper motives and committed with an unlawful intent. He pronounces, therefore, that the Senate, in the violations of the Constitution which he deliberately imputes to it, is guilty, that volition and design on the part of the Senate are necessarily implied, and that the legal conclusion is that the Senate was prompted by improper motives and committed the violation with an unlawful intent. And he most respectfully and kindly solicits the Senate to overleap the restraint of the Constitution, which limits its journal to the record of its own proceedings, and place alongside of them his sentence of condemnation of the Senate. That the President did not intend to make the journal of the Senate a medium of conveying his sentiments to the people is manifest. He knows perfectly well how to address to them his appeals, and the remarkable fact is established by his private secretary, that, simultaneously with the transmission to the Senate of his protest, a duplicate was transmitted to the Globe, his official paper, for publication, and it was forthwith published accordingly. For what purpose, then, was it sent here? It is painful to avow the belief, but one is compelled to think that it was only sent in a spirit of insult and defiance. The President is not content with vindicating his own rights. He steps forward to maintain the privileges of the House of Representatives also. Why? Was it to make the House his ally, and to excite its indignation against the offending Senate? Is not the House perfectly competent to sustain its own privileges against every assault? I should like to see, sir, a resolution introduced into the House alleging a breach of its privileges by a resolution of the Senate, which was intended to maintain and violated the constitutional rights of both houses in regard to the public purse, and to be present at its discussion. The President exhibits great irritation and impatience at the presumptuousness of a resolution which, without the imputation of any bad intention or design, ventures to allege that he has violated the Constitution and laws. His constitutional and official infallibility must not be questioned. To controvert it is an act of injustice, inhumanity, and calumny. He is treated as a criminal, and without summons he is prejudged, condemned, and sentenced. Is the President scrupulously careful of the memory of the dead, or the feelings of the living, in respect to violations of the Constitution? If a violation by him implies criminal guilt, a violation by them cannot be innocent and guiltless. And how has the President treated the memory of the immortal father of his country, that great man who, for purity of purpose and character, wisdom and moderation, unsullied virtue and unsurpassed patriotism, is without competition in past history or among living men, and whose equal we scarcely dare hope will ever be again presented as a blessing to mankind? How has he been treated by the President? Has he not again and again pronounced that, by approving the bill chartering the first bank of the United States, Washington violated the Constitution of his country? That violation, according to the President, included volition and design, was prompted by improper motives, and was committed with an unlawful intent. It was the more inexcusable in Washington because he assisted and presided in the convention which formed the Constitution. If it be unjust to arraign, try unheard, and condemn as guilty a living man filling an exalted office with all the splendor, power, and influence which that office possesses, how much more cruel is it to disturb the sacred and venerated ashes of the illustrious dead, who can raise no voice and make no protests against the imputation of high crime? What has been the treatment of the President towards that other illustrious man, yet spared to us, but who is lingering upon the very verge of eternity? Has he abstained from charging the father of the Constitution with criminal intent in violating the Constitution? Mr. Madison, like Washington, assisted in the formation of the Constitution, was one of its ablest expounders and advocates, and was opposed, on constitutional ground, to the first bank of the United States. But yielding to the force of circumstances, and especially to the great principle that the peace and stability of human society require that a controverted question, which has been finally settled by all departments of government by long acquiescence, and by the people themselves, should not be open to perpetual dispute and disturbance, he approved the bill chartering the present Bank of the United States. Even the name of James Madison, which is but another for purity, patriotism, profound learning, and enlightened experience, cannot escape the imputations of his present successor. And lastly, how often has he charged Congress itself with open violations of the Constitution? times almost without number. During the present session he has sent in a message in regard to the land bill in which he has charged it with an undisguised violation, a violation so palpable that it is not even disguised, and must, therefore, necessarily imply a criminal intent. Sir, the advisers of the President, whoever they are, deceive him and themselves. They have vainly supposed that, by an appeal to the people, and an exhibition of the wounds of the President, they could enlist the sympathies and the commiseration of the people, that the name of Andrew Jackson would bear down the Senate and all opposition. They have yet to learn, what they will soon learn, that even a good, responsible name may be used so frequently as an endorser that its credit and the public confidence in its solidity have been seriously impaired. They mistake the intelligence of the people, who are not prepared to see and sanction the President putting forth indiscriminate charges of a violation of the Constitution against whomsoever he pleases, and exhibiting unmeasured rage and indignation when his own infallibility is dared to be questioned. End of Section 2.
Section 3 of The World's Best Orations, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Wayne Cook. The World's Best Orations, Volume 4, On the Expunging Resolutions by Henry Clay. Pre-oration of the speech of January 16, 1837, delivered in the United States Senate against Andrew Jackson. Mr. President, what patriotic purpose is to be accomplished by this expunging resolution? What new honor or fresh laurels will it win for our common country? Is the power of the Senate so vast that it ought to be circumscribed, and that of the President so restricted that it ought to be extended? What power has the Senate? None separately. It can only act jointly with the other House or jointly with the executive. And although the theory of the Constitution supposes, when consulted by him, it may freely give an affirmative or negative response according to the practice as it now exists, it has lost the faculty of pronouncing the negative monosyllable. When the Senate expresses its deliberate judgment in the form of resolution, that resolution has no compulsory force, but appeals only to the dispassionate intelligence, the calm reason, and the sober judgment of the community. The Senate has no army, no navy, no patronage, no lucrative offices, no glittering honors to bestow. Around us there is no swarm of greedy expectants, rendering us homage, anticipating our wishes, and ready to execute our commands. How is it with the President? Is he powerless? He is felt from one extremity to the other of this vast republic, by means of principles which he has introduced, and innovations which he has made in our institutions, alas, but too many countenanced by Congress and a confiding people, he exercises, uncontrolled, the power of the state. In one hand he holds the purse, and in the other brandishes the sword of the country. Myriads of dependents and partisans scattered over the land are ever ready to sing hosannas to him and to laud to the skies whatever he does. He has swept over the government during the last 8 years like a tropical tornado. Every department exhibits traces of the ravages of the storm. Take as one example the Bank of the United States. No institution could have been more popular with the people, with Congress, and with state legislatures. None ever better fulfilled the great purposes of its establishment. But it, unfortunately, incurred the displeasure of the President. He spoke, and the bank lays prostrate. And those who were loudest in its praise are now loudest in its condemnation. What object of his ambition is unsatisfied? When disabled from age any longer to hold a scepter of power, he designates his successor and transmits it to his favorite. What more does he want? Must we blot, deface, and mutilate the records of the country to punish the presumptuousness of expressing an opinion contrary to his own? What patriotic purpose is to be accomplished by this expunging resolution? Can you make that not to be which has been? Can you eradicate from memory and from history the fact that in March 1834 a majority of the Senate of the United States passed the resolution which excites your enmity? Is it your vain and wicked object to arrogate to yourselves that power of annihilating the past which has been denied to omnipotence itself? Do you intend to thrust your hands into our hearts and to pluck out the deeply rooted convictions which are there? Or is it your design merely to stigmatize us? You cannot stigmatize us. Ne'er yet did base dishonor blur our name. Standing securely upon our conscious rectitude, and bearing aloft the shield of the Constitution of our country, your puny efforts are impotent, and we defy all your power. Put the majority of 1834 in one scale, and that by which this expunging resolution is to be carried in the other, and let truth and justice in heaven above and on earth below, and liberty and patriotism, decide the preponderance. What patriotic purpose is to be accomplished by this expunging resolution? Is it to appease the wrath and to heal the wounded pride of the chief magistrate? If he be really the hero that his friends represent him, he must despise all mean condescension, all groveling sycophancy, all self-degradation and self-abasement. He would reject with scorn and contempt, as unworthy of his fame, your black scratches and your baby lines in the fair records of his country. Black lines, black lines. Sir, I hope the Secretary of the Senate will preserve the pen with which he may inscribe them, and present it to the senator of the majority whom he may select as a proud trophy to be transmitted to his descendants. And hereafter, when we shall lose the forms of our free institutions, all that now remain to us, some future American monarch, in gratitude to those by whose means he has been enabled, upon the ruins of civil liberty, to erect a throne, and to commemorate especially this expunging resolution, may institute a new order of knighthood, and confer on it the appropriate name of the Knights of the Black Lines. But why should I detain the Senate, or needlessly waste my breath in fruitless exertions? The decree has gone forth. It is one of urgency, too. The deed is to be done, that foul deed which, like the blood staining the hands of the guilty Macbeth, all ocean's waters will never wash out. Proceed, then, to the noble work which lies before you, and, like other skillful executioners, do it quickly. And when you have perpetrated it, go home to the people, and tell them what glorious honors you have achieved for our common country. Tell them that you have extinguished one of the brightest and purest lights that ever burned at the altar of civil liberty. Tell them that you have silenced one of the noblest batteries that ever thundered in defense of the Constitution and bravely spiked the cannon. Tell them that, henceforward, no matter what daring or outrageous act any president may perform, you have forever hermetically sealed the mouth of the Senate. Tell them that he may fearlessly assume what powers he pleases, snatch from its lawful custody the public purse, command a military detachment to enter the halls of the Capitol, overawe Congress, trample down the Constitution, and raise every bulwark of freedom. But that the Senate must stand mute in silent submission, and not dare to raise its opposing voice. Tell them that it must wait until a House of Representatives, humbled and subdued like itself, and a majority of it composed of the partisans of the President, shall prefer articles of impeachment. Tell them, finally, that you have restored the glorious doctrine of passive obedience and non-resistance. And if the people do not pour out their indignation and imprecations, I have yet to learn the character of American freemen. End of section 3.